We have lots to talk about in tonight's video, including the latest offseason trade speculation as well as some UFA speculation as well. Tonight we're looking at teams like the Oilers, the Blues, the Canadiens, and could we still see a Blues-Habs trade involving Jordan Kyrou? We'll discuss the latest information there. Plus, we have some updates on the New York Islanders and some trades they were trying to make around the draft. To land James Hagens, there was some talk about Ilya Sorokin, but one NHL insider seems to think it was a different target on Utah's part. Some pending extensions as well for players like Adrian Kempe and Alex Tuch. UFA Evgeny Kuznetsov still trying to find a landing spot. And plus, we have another update from an NHL insider on the format of the draft moving forward coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to discuss here in today's video. Not an overly eventful, busy day in the NHL today, but we did have a few quick updates, and then, of course, some of the rumors that have been kind of floating around here over the past few days. Nikolai Kovalenko, most recently of the San Jose Sharks, before that was with the Colorado Avalanche, has left the NHL. He was unqualified by the Sharks, making him an unrestricted free agent, and he's opted to sign a 2-year contract to go over and play in Russia in the KHL for CSKA. So he will not be in the NHL for at least the next few years. Not really sure what exactly went wrong for him with the Sharks. I know when he was in Colorado, to me, I thought he might have a promising future, but things kind of took a turn for the negative after that trade, sending him to the Sharks last season. As I mentioned as well, we get an update today from TSN insider Darren Dreger, who has confirmed that the NHL general managers have indeed voted for their wishes to have the draft format for the future here to remain the way it is. We know that Gary Bettman's made it pretty clear that the NHL will move forward with whatever format the teams want. And essentially, there was an appetite from the NHL general managers and their staffs, at least by enough of them to warrant the change to go to a decentralized version like we just saw here at the end of June. And based on how everything went, most of us thought that they're probably going to switch it back next year because, in my opinion, this year's draft was really, from a broadcast perspective and from a tech perspective, a bit of a failure. And it was really, I don't know, it left a lot to be desired, in my opinion. But we had heard from Elliot Friedman and a few other insiders a couple days ago suggesting that things were trending towards, because they were NHL GMs were voting on it again, and that it was trending towards being that it wasn't going to change. And now Dreger's saying essentially that the vote has concluded, and that is the case, which is a surprise to many around the NHL. Yeah, so it sounds like they're hoping, though, to make some tweaks for the production to make things move along a lot faster and hopefully to avoid a lot of the tech issues. I mean, really, like, there's just no need for it to take anywhere near the length of time it did for the first round. We saw lots of tech issues. It just, I don't know. I've loved watching the draft for a long time, and it kind of sucked the life out of it to me, and it just wasn't nearly as good, especially what they did at the Sphere in 2024. Like, that might have been the best one they ever did. And to go from that to changing it to not only to not having the teams there, but just how everything was presented and broadcasted and how slow it was crazy. Like, one big thing, for example, is whenever you saw a trade, typically if teams are trading picks, it's because they're targeting a specific player. But yet the team, they would waste their full 5 minutes on the clock, then they would announce the trade, and then the next team gets another 5 minutes because they're now on the clock. And you mean to tell me that they have to take that long? Like, I don't think so. Like, if you're making a trade because you're targeting a specific player, I don't know why they couldn't go from making the trade announcement to, like, a few seconds later going right into the pick. Doesn't make sense to me. But anyways, I know they need a little bit of time. You know, there's broadcast things, and they want to get a jersey ready for them and all that. But, like, I don't know. It just, considering how quickly things can move, there's definitely lots to be desired about how that turned out from a TV perspective. And, for players to be sitting up there waiting 5 hours to find out if they're going to be drafted was just ridiculous. So I am quite shocked by the GMs voting for this again. I know one team that was not in favor because there was an article about it in their local paper from Bruce Garrick, but the Ottawa Senators and Michael Andlauer were definitely not in favor of this format. They wanted to change it back. And it sounds like, from what we've heard from around other reporters, is that it kind of boils down to that they don't want to spend a bunch of money to take their full staffs to another city and be away from their home base with, free agency being so close and all that. I don't know. It seems to me like they can waste a lot of money on other things. Like we see sometimes like a road game in January or February, and when you're watching on TV, you see how many people from the road team's management and scouting and all these other people that are there. And like, okay, that just seems like a little bit of excessiveness. But yet they can pay for all that, but they can't pay for their staff to go to the draft. One of the marquee events on the NHL calendar. Just mind-blowing on my part, but it seems like it's going to stay the same for at least another year. Hopefully it gets a lot better from a TV and broadcast perspective. A few other things when it comes to contracts. So we're looking at one UFA and a couple of extensions here. Evgeny Kuznetsov, of course, we know wants to make a return to the NHL from Russia. We had articles and comments from his agent saying that he absolutely would love to go to Montreal. But Montreal does not appear to be interested. And from what we've heard from certain media members and agent comments is that he's not going to be getting an offer at all to go to the Habs, so that's not going to be an option. His agent also has commented saying that he would be unlikely to make a return to Washington, even if there was interest, but that he would consider a return to the Carolina Hurricanes, whom he last played in the NHL for before making the jump to the KHL. So we'll see. Obviously, Kuznetsov is at a different stage of his career. I don't know what he's looking for in a contract either. I don't know if he's just looking for a one-year league minimum type of contract, but the belief was in comments from his agent that he feels like he still has something to prove here. So we'll see where that goes. Alex Tuch in Buffalo, most likely scenario that they do get a longer-term extension worked out. The belief is now that they have started at least preliminary conversations to work out a long-term extension, and he seems content to stay there. That is home for him. I know he was excited to be traded there, and considering what everything that Buffalo has been through in the last decade plus, they need players who want to be there, and when they get them, they need to hang on to them, especially if they're good players, and Tuch is definitely a good player. So to me, it makes all the sense in the world for them to extend him. Obviously, he's going to be looking for a pretty significant raise, I would think. His contract now is pretty team-friendly, which is why the Sabres were getting interest in trades, because if you look at what he's making, what he can bring and deliver, I have no doubt lots of teams would love to get their hands on that player for that price tag, but it doesn't seem as though he will be one of the pieces moved. We know the Sabres are a team that's still expected to make a bunch of moves here. Like, they've still been relatively quiet in the grand scheme of things. We don't know what's going to transpire here with Bowen Byram, if it will end up in a trade like a lot of us have thought, or if they'll end up signing him short term and deal with this later. We've heard other rumblings about other players too, including Matthias Samuelsson. I know was another player on the back end that was rumored to be available for trade. We know that they want to make some more changes to their forward group, but they haven't really done a whole lot of that either. So again, a team that's been out of the playoffs for 14 years. I do expect to see some more activity here throughout the summertime. Adrian Kempe is another name to watch in Los Angeles as well. The general belief from Elliot Friedman on his last podcast, like I said, that his latest 32 Thoughts, which has been out for a few days now, it was 3 hours long. So I'm still kind of slowly working my way through it and talking about all the information that he touched on. But I know with Kempe, he said that we're looking at an extension, that Kempe is looking for a pretty large raise, and then obviously a longer-term contract as well. So the belief is, we don't have any reason to think that LA doesn't want to sign him or that he doesn't want to sign there. I think there's, based on what Elliot said, that there's definitely mutual interest. But again, like all situations, we don't know how exactly everybody feels about everything. And if they are taking a long time to come to an agreement, then I would think he'll be a name to watch. I don't think there's really much of any chance that we see a trade involving Kempe this summer, but if the negotiations don't go well over the summer for an extension, then I think he'll be a player to watch during the season. But clearly he's a big piece of that forward group, and with some of the other players around him like Kopitar and Doughty and Danault getting a bit older, he's obviously a piece that's, he's not young, but he's not as old as those guys either. So to me, he's still a guy that could be around for a long time. And having some aging veterans that are likely going to wind things down in the next couple of years, I suspect that he would be a player they'd want to keep around. So we'll see what they can work out. But again, if they have negotiation issues, then that speculation will pick up on potential trade or whatnot for the future. Now, a bunch of things as well for not only the future, but one I want to look back on. We heard a bunch of rumors around Ilya Sorokin and the New York Islanders, and we talked about this back, wasn't that long ago, I want to say 3 or 4 days ago, sometime in the past week. I'd have to look back on the channel, see what day we posted that there, but there was some talk around Sorokin, and it was mainly not so much that he was actively being shopped or whatnot. Some think that there is something to those speculations, but his agent has come out and made some comments on about it too, which we'll add to here in a second. But essentially, there was some speculation that at the 25 NHL draft, that we know the Islanders were a team who had the first overall pick. They were expected to take Matthew Schaefer. That was considered the most logical thing, a home run pick. It's what everybody thinks. But they also would like to get their hands on homegrown talent James Haggins, who was expected to likely go in the top 5 or 6 picks and was a really good future forward who has the upside of being possibly a number 1 center. Could be a big piece for the future as well. They'd really like to leave that draft with both prospects if they could, and there was tons of rumors around what they were working on, and one of them came up here just that we learned about after the fact, that the Utah Mammoth and the Islanders were having some discussions about Utah's number 4 overall pick, that the Islanders were trying to see if they could swing a deal for that pick. The belief was, the rumors that had come out at the time, back earlier last week, was that the discussions were around Sorokin being the piece that would go to Utah. Now, we do know that Utah had been one of the teams that were heavily rumored to be looking for a goalie upgrade. Well, Sorokin would certainly more than meet that requirement. He's one of the best goalies in the NHL. We also know that the Islanders have a new general manager. They seem to be going in a different direction, but at the same time, we don't really get the full impression that they're going for a teardown or a rebuild. So it kind of makes you think, why would they bother doing that? They have I think a good contract on a great goaltender for many years left. Like he signed for a long time. Great goaltender. They're hard to come by. You better be careful if you're going to move them, right? And like I said, we haven't had the impression this was going to be a teardown. Otherwise, it would have made more sense. But now Dave Pagnotta is saying that may not be the case. And we have also got comments from Sorokin's agent, Dan Milstein, just in the last day or two as well, to kind of corroborate that. He says that Dan Milstein said that at no point was Sorokin ever involved in trade discussions. Like, he was never asked to waive because he does have no trade. He was never asked to waive or anything like that. And the belief was that there was never any serious trade talk around that player. Now, of course, the Islanders could have had discussions. If they never went to Sorokin to ask him, that's another story completely. Like, a lot of discussions happen, I'm sure, in the NHL all the time. And if teams are not real serious about wanting to do it, they're probably not going to ask their player to waive. So, according to his agent, he was never asked to waive. So, even if his name was brought up, it was certainly never a serious discussion that was anywhere close. So, maybe those weren't as, those trade talks maybe weren't as progressed as we may have thought before. Now, Dave Pagnotta is saying, though, that the player that Utah actually wanted wasn't Sorokin, that it was Matt Barzal. Now, Barzal, to me, might make even more sense for Utah. Now, I guess if you're the Islanders, Barzal might be a player that's, I don't think he's easy to replace. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I'm just saying a forward's always easier going to be replaced than a goaltender. A stud goaltender is always the hardest to find. And if you're getting Haggins, well, then he may not replace Barzal right away, but long-term he could. So I guess maybe that's the rationale, and maybe that's why Utah was asking for that type of player, because clearly we know that Utah was in the mix, that they were, with whatever they were picking, if they held that pick, and they did, that they were probably taking a centerman. And it ended up being Caleb Desnoyers of the Moncton Wildcats, which was a terrific young player with a great character, great two-way game, good offensive instincts. Like, he has real solid potential. I think he could be a Selke candidate type of centerman, real solid game all around. Maybe not Patrice Bergeron or Barkov, but something in somewheres in that type of game. Real good player. I really think he has a ton of potential. So I think it's a great pick by Utah. So I can see why Barzal would make sense to them, because basically Barzal has a lot of the similar attributes to guys like Desnoyers and Hagens. He's just a little more older, a little more mature. He's still, mid-20s, good contract. Why wouldn't they want to? He would fit well with their timeline, their age group, and all that kind of stuff. So it makes a lot of sense to me that if I'm Utah and I'm being approached for this pick, that would be a player that I would ask for. Now, we've heard all about the Noah Dobson stuff, and by the time that these conversations were kind of more serious, I think that the Dobson trade to Montreal was pretty well already done, because we had heard about the Dobson trade long before the draft started that day. It ended up being announced at the draft like it was new breaking news, but the insiders had the intel on that several hours beforehand. So it's some interesting stuff there. So Barzal was the player that appears to have been discussed with Utah. I don't know that the Islanders revisit that. Obviously, I think that was a specific need. I don't know what else Matthew Darche is going to do, but the belief is that Darche had told a few players who he kind of envisioned being part of their new core, which included Barzal and Horvat and a couple others, that they weren't going to be moved, that he saw them as being a big part of their future and their plans. So that's why, basically the Islanders, the reports were around to talk to Pagnotta. The sources, he said that they liked Hagens and they were willing to move a lot to get a pick to get him, but they did not like him enough to part with Barzal, which is why it never came to be. And at this point, like I said, I don't know that there'll be any more Barzal rumors, given the fact that they didn't really want to move him. It was more about Utah pushing them, saying, you really want this pick, that's what we're going to need. Now, there was lots of speculation around Pajot. For some reason, the Islanders seem to be very reluctant to move him as well, which is a little bit more mind-boggling. Of course, we do know that they moved Dobson. We've heard lots about Mayfield being available. That's a player that's still obviously out there. And other than that, I think we'll maybe see some more kind of tweaking here of the roster. But generally, I think we could see a few tweaks with some players moved out, like a Mayfield, like I said. But other than that, I don't know that we're going to see a whole lot more from the Islanders before we get to training camp. But you never know. We get a new GM leaving his mark here on the team. And now, as I mentioned as well, could there still be a deal between the Habs and the Blues? There's still new reports, new articles, new hit pieces on the radio and programs where it's still being discussed about Jordan Kyrou going to Montreal. Just in the last couple of days, Pierre McGuire talked about on TSN 690, saying how he believes that the Habs absolutely have the assets to land this player in a trade, and that and the belief is as well that Kyrou, even though his no trade is kicked in, that he would go to Montreal and that he would welcome that change, and that the Blues they're not absolutely 100%, feel like they have to move his contract, but they're motivated and very interested in doing so. So that seems to be the belief. Now, according to what people are saying and what Pierre was saying on 690, was essentially he feels like the dialogue continues. They haven't reached a point where they've had a trade that was agreed upon, but he feels like Montreal really wants to make this trade that they would be able to. It sounds like one of the pieces that they both would agree on to be involved would be defenseman Mike Matheson, which would make a lot of sense to me. So that's one piece, but we know it's going to take more than Matheson to get a player like Kyrou out of St. Louis. It would easily take at least two more assets, maybe three, I don't know, depending on what they are, I guess. We'll say at least two more. I'd say you're probably looking at least a really high-grade prospect and either a roster player or another piece or maybe a first-round pick. You're looking at probably at least three pieces. If you can get a defenseman like Matheson, a good young player who can jump into their lineup, really soon here, and then a first rounder or something like that would probably be some kind of a package that they're looking for. And it seems like they both agree on Matheson being involved, but it's the other pieces that they can't agree on or have not agreed on yet, which is why things have not moved further along. But there's still a lot of people that think that he would accept a trade to go there and that the Blues are very interested in doing so. So it just seems like this won't go away. So as much as it's, to me, not something that makes the it's not that it doesn't make sense. It's just Kyrou's a good player. I'm not surprised there should be a lot of teams that would be interested in getting this guy, but I don't know. It's confusing to me why it's so persistent, and it seems like Montreal is just not giving up on this maybe being a possibility. So we'll see. Another player in St. Louis, according to Elliotte Friedman, and this was on his podcast, talking about Brayden Schenn and how his contract now has changed. Now that we're past July 1, that Brayden Schenn did have a full no move, and that's changed down to a modified no trade where he has 15 teams that he can put on his list. So the belief was, Elliotte mentioned that both of the Ontario teams in Toronto and Ottawa have poked around Schenn in the past, and wonders if now that there's more trade flexibility, if they will continue to do so. Obviously, it sounded before like the Blues management owed enough respect to Schenn that even if they didn't have to speak to him, a lot of people think that they probably would and would want to make sure that they're doing right by him, that he's happy to go if it gets to that point. But again, we know, Toronto would probably be more likely than Ottawa. I think there's more of a need there because they certainly could use a top six. Schenn at different stages of his career could be a top six. Maybe he's a top 9. He can play center. He can play wing. He's a guy you can put in a lot of different spots in your lineup. Obviously, a guy who won with Berube. I would think they'd probably be more aggressive in that pursuit than Ottawa would be. So, again, we'll see. But not necessarily anything imminent or that's really super happening around Schenn. It's just Friedman mentioning how his trade protection has changed and definitely been teams poking around there before, wondering if we could maybe see some movement sometime here in the next little while. An interesting tidbit out of Edmonton as well, another one from Peg Noda, saying that basically it's been really quiet on the goaltending front, even though they seem to make it pretty clear that they were not likely returning with the same goalie tandem. It sure seems more likely than not at this point that they're going to. Outside of them inquiring, which Dave Pagnotta says here that they did make an inquiry with the Ducks before John Gibson was traded to Detroit. Doesn't sound like it was really just a touch base on what the asking price would be. I would think that if they really wanted to do the deal, that they could have paid a similar price or done, what Detroit did. It wasn't that huge. So to me, I don't think they wanted him that badly. And I'm not sure exactly what they would have offered and all that. Maybe it was a case where they just maybe Anaheim didn't like the return that Edmonton was offering. I don't know, but it just seems like they inquired, but I don't know how serious they were. Otherwise, he mentions that, obviously during the season last year, which was in the first half of the year, they did inquire with the Bruins on Jeremy Swayman, and really they haven't done much of anything since. So it's been pretty quiet. And like I said, there was the Carter Hart rumor that if he's found innocent, that they could pursue him by signing him, and then some are denying that now, saying that's not the case. We'll find out soon enough here in a few weeks' time once we know the outcome of that trial later this month. But it's interesting to note that the Oilers aren't really doing much. Obviously they're going to have to make several changes to their coaching staff. Obviously they lost their skating coach and their assistant coach, Glenn Gulletson, of course, who's now the head coach in Dallas. He ran the power play, took Peltier with him, who was their skating coach. So, obviously there's a couple of guys there gone. It was believed that Paul Coffey, who was running the D-Corps, wasn't real crazy about continuing on behind the bench. He kind of jumped in there last year more than anything, just kind of on a whim, just to help out. But it doesn't seem like he really wanted to be a coach on a long-term basis. He'll still be around the team. He still advises the owner on different aspects of the game. So he's not really going anywhere or leaving the organization. But the belief was that he wasn't likely going to be wanting to be behind a bench for super long term. And of course, the goalie coach is being changed as well. So it almost sounds like they're going to change the goalie coach and see if they can work wonders here. That just seems risky to me. If they not learned their lesson, quite shocking. Or would they revisit Jeremy Swayman? I don't know that the Bruins really want to go there. But based on Swayman's full body of work last year, it's possible that they might consider it. They might not love that contract anymore, but he did have a really good showing at the World Championship. Is it possible Swayman could bounce back? It really is. I mean, they could make a mistake and trade him, but, what's the asking price going to be as well? They are limited on assets, and even if the Bruins did agree to trade Swayman, they're going to want a lot for him, given where he's at and what he's accomplished and everything like that, and the Oilers would probably have a real tough time meeting that. And like I said, from a cap perspective, it also would be very challenging as well. So I'm not really sure it's really even reasonable. So what are the Oilers going to do with their goaltending? It seems like it might not be much of anything before the season starts, which to me is, well, more than mildly concerning. Let me know what you think. And in comments, we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.